Sorry that today's episode is a bit shorter than normal. That's because there were some audio issues on the call with Carol McGrath. We hope you enjoy the interview anyway. And welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harvey.
And my name is Stephen A. Mackay.
We're both best-selling historical fiction authors, and together we chat about all things historical and anything that could fall under the banner of action and adventure in books, film, TV, and games.
Oh, and we also talk about rock music from time to time.
On today's episode, we're pleased to welcome to the podcast author Carol McGrath. Carol has written 7 historical novels. The most recent is The Stone Rose, set in 14th century London. This followed on from The Silken Rose and The Damask Rose, both set in the 13th century. Her first series was the Daughters of Hastings trilogy, set at the end of the 11th century and made up of The Handfasted Wife, The Swan-Daughter, and The Betrothed Sister. Carol has also written a non-fiction book called Sex and Sexuality in the Tudor Era. Welcome, Carol.
Hello, Carol.
I've left one out, and it's the one-off, and it's about Thomas Cromwell's wife, Elizabeth Cromwell, and it's called, appropriately, Mistress Cromwell.
Oh, right.
And it's looking at his career from her perspective, and it has been a real, that's still a bestseller, actually, at times.
So I missed out your best-selling book. That was good of me.
They've all done very, very well. And, as well as I do, that getting to the number ones and getting those little stickers and those charts sometimes depends, or it's helped by price. So when you get one of these Amazon price reductions to 99p or something like that, then obviously, well, you're more likely, I wouldn't say obviously, but you're more likely to, edge Pillars of the Earth off the top number one place.
Yes.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah.
Whatever one Ken Follett has on the go at the time.
Okay. So you've written about all these different centuries and periods, and you've also written non-fiction, of course, about the Tudor era that we talked about. So where next? Are you looking at moving to any other eras or?
Well, that's tricky because being traditionally published, as you know, they do quite like to stay within boundaries. They like me to be doing medieval books, to be honest. As far as non-fiction is concerned, I could do what I wanted. I've actually declined. I was asked by Pen and Sword if I would write. In fact, I got as far almost as the contract. Well, I did get as far as the contract, but I just don't have time to do maybe one of you would be interested in this. They're looking for somebody to write it. How to survive in Viking England.
That's interesting.
So they are interested in someone writing that one. If they may have found somebody already. It's part of a series. And say, for example, Tony Mott has already written How to Survive in Medieval England. And that's been a very high-selling book. So it is a good call. But for me, it would have meant doing an awful lot more research on the fiction that I'm researching at the moment. But you two write in that period, so there you are. I suppose I have got another, you asked me what I was writing. I have got another non-fiction for Pen and Sword that I'm writing, which is topically, but before all of this stuff happened in Kiev, it is topically about Githa, King Harold's elder daughter, who married the Grand Prince of Kiev after she'd been exiled from England, along with her grandmother, also called Githa. And so I wrote that as a novel and did an awful lot of research for that with the Betrothed Sister. And I did a lot of research in the Slavonic Studies Library, in fact, in Oxford for it. And so I said that I would really quite like to write it as a biography. And so that's the nonfiction I'm doing at the moment. But again, with pressure of time, I've asked them to push it back for another year. So it won't actually be in the shops until 25, probably. It's very interesting. But then the other project that I'm writing at the moment, and I've got a book coming out next year, which is about Stephen and Matilda and the anarchy, the 12th century anarchy. Of course, famously, Matilda, was left the crown of England by her father, Henry I, and Stephen stepped in and he took the crown. So appropriately, the book was entitled The Stolen Crown. And really it is, about her adventures and about her struggle to establish herself as a woman trying to claim the rights trying to claim this crown. And she nearly got there. She nearly did it.
Carol, I wanted to ask you a question about what you mentioned there, The Stolen Crown. It's not due out until next May, like yes. 2023. And I'm self-published most of my books, so I can just put them out, finish it, and 2 weeks later it's published. And then I can move on to the next one and forget about it, basically. And I always find it weird for you that you have a completely different experience, because you're going to have to wait for like 6 months or a year or whatever before your next book is actually published. So is it still in your head, or do you just forget about it and move on to something else? And is the excitement still there when it does finally come out?
The excitement's there for it, because it's always very exciting whenever the book comes out. And I don't mind. It takes me quite a long time to write a book. I mean, I'm not a quick writer, really, which is why I've pushed back the nonfiction, the key of nonfiction. But the thing is, I do move on. In my head, I'm already now excited about Berengarian.
Yeah, I find the same.
Yeah, and there will be things that happen during the year that will bring me back, because they do go through quite a long editing process, and they've got somebody booked who does the next series, the next bit of the editing process in October. And then there will be other things that come up, they're doing the launch of the cover, and then they'll be doing this and that. But I know other people who are self-published, and the really lovely thing about being self-published, if you can do it, I would be dreadful at it, by the way, Steve. I couldn't. My friend Liz Harris is excellent. And she was, first of all, traditionally published. She got her rights back from Chocolate, and she just loves the challenge of self-publishing, and she just loves being in control of her own destiny and her own timings. Yeah. And her books are excellent. She gets somebody else she books in an editor, and she books in somebody to do the cover for her, and she follows everything very detailed, like all her sales. I have no idea how many books I'm selling, really. So maybe that's why I quite look at the Amazon charts, from time to time, because it's the only clue I have as to how my books are doing.
I think I'm somewhere in between with Head of Zeus and Aries, in that my contract is paid out monthly, so I get royalty statements monthly. So I'm quite in touch with what's going on. So it's quite a different. So it is a traditional publisher, but I think the contract is quite a modern sort of hybrid style contract, and so I have much more of that sort of almost like a self-published writer, and I can see what's going on. But I still have those lag times, although they're not as long as some traditional publishers. But for example, I've got a book coming out in December, but it's been finished, for months now. I mean, it's been, I don't know when I handed it in, probably, I can't remember now. It's like April or something, probably I handed in the manuscript. And that sort of 6-month lag for me, although you do go back every now and again and you get first the copy edits, or you get the structural edits, then the copy edits, and then proofreading or whatever. And I just literally had the proofread stuff come through last week for it. So you do go back, as you're saying, sort of touch base, kind of remember what you were writing about. But it's difficult. I do find that I get, because I'm 50,000 words into the draft of another book now, And so I'm focused on another time period and another location, and suddenly going back and having specific questions like saying, did you really mean this place or this name, or was this correct? And I have to sort of kind of twist myself back into that place I was in 6 months ago when I was writing it and try to remember, what was I thinking? I don't know. Half the time
That must be so hard.
What happened was, one little anecdote from this, getting the proofread comments last week, was I was going through page by page, just going through the proofreaders' comments, and I saw the name of a character, and I thought, hang on a minute, that's a name of a character that I've got in my new book that I'm writing. Because obviously it was the name that just, I'd pick out names out of lists of historical names. And obviously something about that name had sort of resonated with me or whatever. And I used it as a character in Forest of Foes. And then I'd used it in this latest book. So I've had to change it in the book that I'm writing now, so as not to repeat, in two different series, the same name of a character.
Confuse things.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, I could see how that could happen.
And the novelette that I've just finished, for some reason, I'd used the word 10-day, obviously meaning 10 days. And my wife said to me, she was reading it and she said, is this right? 10-day, why did you write that? And I said, I don't think I wrote that. My editor must have changed that. I never used that word. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit the period. And I went back to the very first draft from ages ago, and I had actually written it. So for me to write something and completely forget about it, and it doesn't even make sense, and that was only like 2 months ago or something, I can't imagine how hard it is for you to then have to go back to some a year before or whatever and edit again when it's so far out your head.
I don't know about Matthew, but I am somebody who keeps notes. I have a lot of notebooks, and I don't know if you can see this, but these are little Greek notebooks.
Yeah.
They're like little exercise books. And I have these for all my, like there's a timeline that started for, I think, probably Berengaria.
Right.
I will do, the first thing I'll do is from research, I will do a timeline, and then, I will do a three structure. Well, I've got all of a 3-act structure, more or less lists of what I want to put in each section. And that's movable feast. I can change that. I'm not, one of these strict type planners. But I also tend to use spiders, little spider graphs.
Yeah.
Doing my chapters. And I also do it before I even start doing that. Generally, I haven't done it this time, but maybe at the same time, more or less, I would do spiders for the characters, my main characters, so that, because the worst thing, this is tying up with what Steve has just said, but it's a different kind of thing, and it's something I do sometimes, forgetting the color of their eyes or forgetting the color of their hair. Yeah. And, it's as bad as repeating names or getting the name wrong or the spelling of the name wrong, although that, the editing process can fine tune that. But I have to keep those. And then whenever I need to go back again during this editing process, or since the book's not coming out, let's take the Stolen Crimes, since the book's not coming out till next May, and there'll be things they'll want me to do in the in-between time, including some publicity things and blogs and things like that, and articles, I can go back to those notebooks and I'll find my little spider graphs, and I'll find my 3-act thing and just read it quickly, my outline. And that helps. And it also helps with being consistent as you're writing it.
Yeah. I use Scrivener, and the Scrivener, lots of the you can include lots of information. So each chapter or scene, I've got a little synopsis for, and you can say which point of view it's written in and which characters appear and that sort of stuff. So you can.
But you're using an Apple Mac, are you?
No, I'm using Windows. So Scrivener, I've had a Windows version for years now. I've used it since the first book, actually.
I did use it for Windows, but I came apart with using Scrivener because maybe I didn't have it set up properly. Right.
I find it incredible. I find it as a tool for writing. I couldn't look back once I started using. I was like 25,000 words into The Serpent's Sword, which was my first novel, and then I transitioned over to Scrivener because I couldn't stand using Word anymore. And ever since, I've used Scrivener. And I use, you talked about timeline. I do everything on the computer. I do have notepads as well, but I use Eon Timeline, which So AEON. And I think I think version 3 has come out. I've got version 2 and I use that, but I think the third version 3 has come out. It must be very similar, but you add your characters in there and you give them their date of birth and things like that. And then you go through and you create events on the timeline. You say which year, day, month, even down to the second. You say you can go into real detail and say how long each event lasts and what event follows it and all this. I don't go into that level of detail, but obviously you can do if you want to. But you can attach the characters that are involved in the scene to the scene, and it will tell you their age at that time, as long as you give them the right birth date. So it's quite useful for things like that. So there's lots of stuff that I don't use because I find in the end it becomes a bit, you could bloat. You could use it for weeks just creating a timeline. But it will even import the timeline events into Scrivener as scenes and chapters. You can plan it all out. I did that with Wolf of Wessex, but I haven't been quite as assiduous with using it. A bit like you with Scrivener, you said you used it a bit and then you sort of moved on to other things. So it's a bit like that.
What about you, Steve? Do you use notebooks or?
I have notebooks, but I don't really plan. No, I use Word, and I just use another Word file for all my characters. So I have a character list that I can search. I just go to find, and I'll bring up the name, or even the first few letters of the name, and it will find it. And it has all their, like, same as you, hair colour, eye colour.
Yeah.
Because reviewers always find it. And in my first book, Wolf said, I think I had Matilda. She had blue eyes at the start, and by the end, she had like brown eyes. And one of the reviews actually pointed it out. And ever since then, I've been quite assiduous. And everything, as soon as a new character appears in a chapter, even if it's just for one line, the name goes straight in that file. And it just you can keep on top of it so much easier then.
Yeah. So going back to the books that you've written, Carol, and talking about, you've obviously written mostly novels, but you've published a non-fiction book, and you've got some more non-fiction coming out. How did the experience of the two things compare? Which did you prefer?
They're very different. Non-fiction is interesting because if you love research, and I do like the research side of it, you're really strict using that, but you still have to plan an interesting structure with it. And there is a move in non-fiction at the moment. They love storytellers. People love non-fiction told in a anecdotal way, if you like.
Narrative, like a narrative form.
Yeah.
Yes. So there is an advantage to that. And there's also an advantage to maybe thinking about your structure, depending on what you're writing, maybe not starting at the beginning and doing it in a linear way, but you can start in the middle and then go out. I mean, there are different things you can do. I'm not saying I'm doing that. I'm not. I'm doing mine linear. And of course, Tudor Sex was topics, it was just topics building up. But I did introduce it with, for example, just to attract attention. It's the usual thing, like your first page attracts attention, doesn't it? Your first few pages. And so I did start with the execution of Henry VIII's fifth wife, Catherine Howard.
I thought you were going to say you started with a torrid sex scene on the first page.
That could have been another way.
That's what I would have done. You see, if I was writing, that's what I would have done.
You would have been more popular than me.
I would bring readers in.
Yes. I didn't quite do that, but I did go into all the, I did examine the mores of the time, put it like that, the church power. And of course, that Tudor period, you did have the move towards the Reformation. So you had moving from Catholicism to Reformation, and that affected a lot of things like midwifery and so on. They weren't allowed to have their saints, the little statues of saints while they were having their baby, or certain things, certain things they weren't allowed to have once it came to the Reformation. So it is a period of change. And there was, you got into superstition things as well. You also got into aphrodisiacs, and you got into just all sorts of things, witchcraft and things like that too. But that is a different. It was fun to research, is the point I'm trying to make. Really fun to research and really interesting to write.
So if you had to choose, if you were told by your editor, look, you can never do novels again, or you can never do non-fiction again, which would you most? You had to choose. Which would you choose?
I really prefer fiction.
Okay.
I would give up the I won't be doing. I probably most likely will not do another non-fiction after The English Princess, or The English Princess of Kiev, which it may be called.
So what's the main reason for that?
Time.
Time just takes too long to do the non-fiction.
Too long to do both. If you're running both alongside each other and you're quite detailed about what you do, it just takes me too long. I love both, but I absolutely adore writing fiction.
Yeah.
I prefer bringing those characters into. It's like I watched a film last night, which I thought was absolutely marvelous. I'm sure you've both seen it, The King.
Oh yeah. On is that the retelling of like the Henry V? Is it Henry V?
Henry V and his problems on succession.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, Stephen.
Yes, it's got a fantastic.
Was it good?
It's well worth a watch. Yeah.
Victorian script.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, I mean, that's what I like, because it's a story, and you would get some historians who maybe write non-fiction about Henry V. You could be critical about that film, especially Falstaff's place within the film. But yet it's brilliant drama and brilliant scene setting and fabulous acting, and it felt authentic.
It feels authentic. I think that's the thing, that some films manage to capture, books too, capture that sort of authenticity, even if they're not 100% accurate in terms of the history.
Yeah, and I mean, I would hope that I was fairly accurate with my history, but I mean, I certainly would not write stuff that I'd not researched, and I don't move things around too much at all. I mean, I'm fairly religious about that, but I just love to try and tell a good story, and that to me is the most important aspect of it, is the storytelling.
I think for me, it goes back a little bit to the self-publishing, traditional publishing kind of thing, where a novelist, or at least the novels that I write, allow me a bit of freedom. I don't feel quite as constrained. I kind of like the idea of non-fiction. I sort of feel myself thinking, oh, maybe I could write a non-fiction book about something. But then I just think, oh, you like making stuff up too much, and you just can't make it up in the non-fiction.
Exactly. And then you find those white spaces, where you don't really know what happened. Like if I'm doing the bit in Denmark, which I did do in The Betrothed Sister. And I did have her in Denmark, but I had to make all of that up to a background of what Denmark would have been like and court life would have been like at that time. And the characters were the real characters were there, apart from one or two whom I made up completely.
And you focus quite a lot on women in history, which I thought must be hard to research for our kind of time periods. I've been reading a lot about the Viking era lately in England, and women just really don't get a look in. They're just not mentioned. Even Alfred the Great's wife, Ealhswith, she wasn't even deemed important enough to get much of a mention in Asser's history. If someone like that, a king's wife, can't get mentioned, how hard is it for you to research normal women?
Some of them are easier than others. And of course, with sources, you will always have, they'll have their slant, won't they? And some of them will be a bit fabulous as well. There'll be fabulous sources. They'll not be really, they'll have their own truth. So there's that side of it. But you can find, let's just take the women of the Norman Conquest. The women I write are really quite well-known women, but they will only get a line. They're like an end note, and they're in the shadows. But you will get the odd line, for example, with Countess Githa, who was Harold's mother. I'll just choose somebody who's pretty well known in history. The wife of Godwin of Wessex, Earl Godwin's wife. And also the sister-in-law of King Sweyn of Denmark. So therefore, she was his aunt, the aunt of King Sweyn of Denmark. And so therefore there's those kinds of connections that you can find them. So one of the things about Githa that was said was that she left Exeter, after the siege of Exeter. She held out in Exeter because that was her dower land in 1068. So the people of the West Country refused to pay their tax, particularly in Exeter. And so William the Conqueror, that winter of 68, comes calling, basically with his army, and he sets up outside Exeter, and there's a siege for 3 weeks. Well, that's recorded history, and it's recorded history that Githa was there, and that Githa therefore was allowed to leave with, they gave it in because the burghers of Exeter and the archbishop, or the bishop rather, eventually gave it, they negotiated with the conqueror, and they in return for their city not being defiled and sacked and all the rest of it. And in return, also for Githa being allowed to go into exile. This is the countess. She went into exile with other Saxon noble women and her granddaughter as well, which is Githa I talk about, referred to as Gita in the lands of the Rus. So that's recorded, and you can find that in a couple of the chronicles, and in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as well. And so therefore you could just build on that. And then if you know about, say, the siege of Exeter and what happened, you could think what would have been like for a woman within the royal palace, those women within the royal palace at that time. And then you wonder, why was she allowed to leave? And she, as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says, with a great Anglo-Saxon treasure, why was she allowed to leave with this treasure? Whatever the treasure was, you can make up what the treasure was. So in a way, I've got a bit of freedom with researching my women. I can find out what women's lives, because there's lots written about it, so what noble women's lives are, and I can find the little nuggets that place, that you'll find in the chronicles. There'll be the odd little nugget, and build on that. And what I do is that at the end of the book, I do have an author note, because I think it's interesting for people with those women to find out the few lines that you were able to find out about them and how you put it together, how you put the puzzle together.
Yeah, that's true. I think both of us do that as well. I think the author's note's important.
And I think it's interesting for people to read that. I know people quite like them.
Yeah, I think so.
But so that's where I find snippets, and then I build on it. Well, when you get as far as the Stone Rose and you get as far as Isabella of France, well, she's highly recorded.
Yeah, I suppose when you get later into history, you've got a lot more evidence. But I think the further back you go, especially into that sort of what was known as the Dark Ages, it becomes quite tough to find any more than just a few snippets. But
the likes of Boadicea and so on. But with ordinary women, there are a lot of non-fiction books, secondary sources that you can look at to find out what their lives were and what the mores of the time were and what marriage was like, and all of that kind of thing. Yeah.
So you can extrapolate a lot from that into the characters. Yeah. So we talked a lot about writing so far about history, and you've said that you take quite a long time to write, that you're not a very fast writer, a lot of planning and the thing goes into it, and obviously a lot of research. What do you write every day, and what is your sort of day-to-day writing process when you do have a writing day?
I generally write every day, most of the time. At the moment, I'm back for 3 weeks in the UK. I've got a lot of other things to do. And fortunately, I've just been doing editing. And the first week I was back, I was finishing that. I finished that last week. So I was working on writing, I guess. It would be unusual for me not to be writing every day. And the habit is I prefer to write in the mornings. I might stop for a break at lunchtime, and then I'll write to about 3 or 4 o'clock. But some of that's research as well. I mean, it's not all just forming the sentences. And sometimes...
Yeah, I'm about the same as you.
Yeah, if I get a buzz, I'll go on with it. And if I don't, then I'll do some more research and try and get inspired that way.
Do you have a number of words that you aim for each day?
No, never. I am not a word length fanatic. In fact, I hate it.
You in your books, so I've read, I think I've only read one of your books. I think I read the Handfasted Wife. Yeah, I think that's the only one of yours I've read. But anyway, but in it, I remember there's intrigue and romance and the day-to-day life in court, but there's also some action and adventure, and there's some fights and battles and things happen because that's in the story, and that's sort of the time that you were writing about. So the question is, do you enjoy writing the action scenes in books?
Well, yes. Actually, I do enjoy writing the action scenes in books, and I enjoy reading them as well. And I can remember, to go back to Doug Kai, and why I think he was an excellent tutor, was with battle scenes. He said, I want you to draw it out, and I want you to imagine, I want you to know exactly where everybody is at exactly times, so that you don't mess it up in any way. And I think he gave me one or two things to read, and one of them was a Hemingway.
All right.
I can't remember which one. It's so long ago since I wrote that book, but I just remember he really was helpful. I would write a battle scene 3 or 4 times, and he would look at it 3 or 4 times.
That's good. So
he was really good on that.
So you've mentioned that you read some Hemingway and other things to give you some ideas for writing battle scenes.
Yeah, well, I read for Hemingway a long time ago, but he's not my favorite writer, but I think he's a good writer.
No, but it's really interesting that, I think we've talked about to other people about this. I mean, we talked to Bernard Cornwell the other day, and Stephen asked him whether he read different genres and different things, and he said that he didn't tend to read historical fiction, that he'd read other genres. And I think it's really useful to read other genres to give ideas for writing certain scenes and styles. But I was going to ask you about in the action and adventure side of things. Do you do any special research for the action scenes apart from sort of reading other novels?
Oh, I do go well with Stephen and Matilda. There is, of course, the Battle of Lincoln, and I did research that thoroughly in several sources. Stephen's the book that was written at the time about Stephen, and in various things that were written at the time, like Henry of Huntingdon and so on and so forth. So I actually got a very visual feel for the battle.
Have you done have you ever done any of sort of more hands-on stuff, like going and swinging a sword around? Or
no, I've not actually, to be honest. I've gone and watched it, but I've not done it. But I think anybody who's done it would probably write a very good battle.
I think watching it close up, if you go to reenactments and stuff, I think is a start, isn't it? It certainly gives you a feel for things.
I'd love
the sounds and
I'm too old to do it. I think Paula Lofton Wilcox is excellent at it, because do you remember whenever we had we had the HNS conference 2016 in Oxford? Matthew.
Yes, I remember. And she had some of her colleagues from Regia Anglorum.
They were all showing us how to do the swords and fight the battles. I thought that was great. And I read her battle. She does write an excellent battle.
Do you listen to music when you write, Carol?
Well, when I write, I tend to listen to music of the period. I know lots of people who listen to all sorts of rock music and all sorts of things like that when they write. But I do have, I'm very fond of, tells my age, doesn't it? I'm very fond of Van Morrison.
Did Bernard Cornwell not mention him as well?
Bernard Cornwell mentioned Van Morrison as well.
Probably of an age, Bernard Cornwell might be a bit older than me, but not much.
You can go to Van Morrison concert together.
Well, I've been to quite a few Van Morrison concerts in my time, and I do like him very much. And I'm quite fond of some folk music. Like I'm quite affectionate for Fairport Convention.
I love them. They're one of my favourite bands, believe it or not.
Women singer, girl singer, was a very close friend of mine. She just was my neighbour. She died a few years ago, which is very very sadly. And she'd sung with King Crimson, whom I love, and she'd sung with she sang with a lot of those big bands at that time.
Are you talking about Sandy Denny?
No, not Sandy Denny. She came after Bible. Sandy Denny.
All right.
Judy Dabble was on one of the early albums with Chelsea Morning and that sort of thing. Those songs.
Right, okay. Yeah, I love Fairport Convention and Sandy's stuff with them.
Well,
yes, I do like music, but when I'm writing it tends to, on the whole, apart from Fan the Man, it does tend to be more classical. And I love opera.
Yeah, I think when we write it, we both tend to listen to stuff that hasn't got very prominent lyrics in, because it's difficult to concentrate.
Yeah, or
on
a melody
words.
or anything. Yeah,
that's very true. Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Carol, for a wonderful interview. So we've totally out of time now. So we'll edit down, and you can see what we come up with at the end.
I made some sense. I hope I contributed something.
You did.
Thanks, Carol.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again to Carol McGrath for appearing in the interview. And we're sorry about the audio problems we had over the internet connection. Please let us know if you have any questions or things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. You can contact us on the Facebook page. That's facebook.com/rockpaperswordspodcast, or on Twitter @rock_swords. You can find out more about our books on MatthewHarvey.com and StephenAMackay.com. And you can find us both on Twitter and Facebook too. The theme music is written and performed and copyrighted by us. Until next time on Rock, Paper, Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harvey.
And it's goodbye from me, Stephen A. Mackay.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind.
Be safe.
And happy reading.
With an arse of that. I wasn't expecting you to do that again.